From the Tomorrow Theater in Southeast Portland, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, October 10th, before a live audience. Ballots will be arriving in mailboxes across Oregon starting sometime next week. For all the political nerds on stage and in the house tonight, this is like a second birthday. And if you live in Portland, this election is truly one for the record books. Your ballot will look different. How you vote is different. Buckle up. We're going to talk about some of the top issues and races on the ballot, and we've got questions. Is Portland's political dysfunction soon to be a thing of the past, or is the Rose City just entering a new era of kind of a hot mess? Do Republicans have a real shot at winning statewide office for just the third time in the past 40 plus years? Will Oregonians move forward into a universal basic income future? We'll hit on all of that and more, plus give the temperature check on a couple of the most consequential congressional races in the country. They're right here in our backyard. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics Editor Andrew Thien.
I'm OPB Portland City Hall reporter Alex Zielinski.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Bryce Dole.
And I'm Troy Brynolson. I cover Southwest Washington for OPB.
All right. Alex, let's start with you. First, we are live from District 3, right? District 3. And some pretty exciting. We have numbers now. We have districts. It's been a quiet year for you, right, Alex? Nothing going on.
100% no. It's been a bonkers year. And it's going to be another very bonkers year next year. We're setting the stage with all of these things in motions right now for a very wild couple of years. I mean, as a reminder, there's 4 big changes that Portland's going through in the next 24 months or so. First is the size of city council is growing from 5 people to 12. The mayor's no longer going to sit on city council. Second, we're going to have geographic districts like we are in 3 right now. We have 4 across the city. Third, city council members will no longer be overseeing bureaus, which they do now, like, police, water. They're going to only be making policy. There'll be a new city administrator who will be overseeing all those departments. And fourth, we are adopting a new style of voting, ranked choice voting. It's a lot.
That's it? That's it. We could spend a full hour just kind of reading through candidates' names almost for each district because it's a lot. I promise I won't do that tonight, but Portlanders set in motion this big and bold plan years ago. How does it all feel today? Because it's like we're on the edge of this new era.
I feel like I use this analogy a lot, and I've used it on the podcast, but it feels like we're at the top of a roller coaster. We're all buckled in. We can't jump off. We're about to dive into this probably pretty chaotic, thrilling adventure of democracy. I mean, it might be fun. There'll be adrenaline. Someone might throw up. But we're in it. We can't go back. And so it feels very much, it's exciting, at least as a reporter, to be able to observe what comes next.
Roller coasters, not a fan. I'm not a fan of roller coasters. That's just a personal preference. But okay, so in terms of the election season, what's been different from what you've seen about campaigning when you've got this whole new system? Yeah,
there's a lot that's different, and this is going to be a bit of a long answer. I'll start with money and finances. This year is particularly interesting and different because of some financial restrictions to the city's public financing program, which normally offers matching donations to candidates who promise to only collect donations up to $350 each, so keeping donations small. That budget has been shrunk this year for candidates, mostly because there's so many candidates who want to participate in it. But it means that candidates, their campaign coffers are pretty tiny. They have to kind of choose, okay, should we put money towards lawn signs or Facebook ads or phone banking? And it's limiting. That's also kind of why we're seeing a large number of independent expenditure campaigns crop up. And these are groups that fundraise for candidates, but candidates themselves cannot be associated and coordinate with them. The benefit is that these campaigns or these IE groups can, there's no campaign finance restrictions to what they can fund. And so it helps kind of bolster these campaigns that are kind of cash strapped. Another thing I'm noticing is a lot of coordination and it's kind of a feel good fuzzy feeling among some candidates. There's a lot of support among folks who are on the same ballot, who are competitors, but people who are kind of like-minded in different districts who are pairing up. And this is really, I think, due to the new form of voting that we have, ranked choice, where people are going to be ranking people from their, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it incentivizes people to want to group together, because if you have, if I'm sitting down to vote and there's, I'm going to be putting the first 3 people who are kind of similar in my line of interest first. If they're, and so it incentivizes folks to not tear down competitors, but instead kind of maybe ride their coattails to be the number 2 choice. So maybe that they can also be lifted up on election day in the ranking system.
Yeah, that's not something that you typically see in
not
election
at all.
cycles,
No.
is like lifting someone else up when
Right.
you're
Yeah.
trying to defeat them.
Yeah, and so they're doing door knocking together. They're having events together. They're saying, "Hey, vote for me, but also vote for this other person," which does not normally happen in elections here in Portland. On the same note, there's a lot of candidates, or there's some candidates who are kind of cozying up to everyone who's running for city council because the first job of the new city council in January is going to be voting for a new council president. And that's a really powerful position. It's new in Portland, and it's almost similar to kind of the role that the mayor has right now in terms of the president can set the council agenda. They can kind of decide what comes before council and what doesn't. And so there are people now who are out there kind of campaigning on the intent that they'll win, and that their future colleagues will maybe vote for them to be the top dog in council. And so there's a lot of strategy we're seeing in that sense. The biggest thing is what you mentioned before, that there's just so many people on the ballot. And I think everyone is a bit overwhelmed. And it also means for candidates, there's a lot of work to get your name out there. And to be recognizable and to catch folks' attention. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road when it comes to money.
Let's talk about ranked choice a bit, because it's very unusual that it's going to really matter potentially in some of these races, like the mayor's race, who gets ranked second on ballots, right? Can you explain how that might be a factor?
Yeah. So, people ranked second, third, maybe even fourth might have a chance of winning, which kind of sounds illogical when you think about it. But, someone who has a ton of number 2 votes could rise above the first person who is ranked after these kind of rounds of tabulation. And so same with, this is the mayor's race, but same with city council races, you see mayoral candidates kind of, partnering together to support one another to say, hey, maybe rank us both on your ballot at the same time. And I think there's a lot of folks in the mayor's race who are counting on maybe not being people's number 1 favorite person, but maybe just like a lukewarm second, which, that's my take on the mayor's race right now. But it could be successful, they could win.
Okay, I promise we will leave the world of Portland politics soon, but one more for you, Alex. This was ultimately approved, the whole, system of government change, because people voted for it and they're tired of dysfunction. Do we have a sense at this point, how much of a mess the transition is going to be? Because it's a lot going on. Will voters be willing to roll with the punches here?
It's going to take a lot of time to see what that looks like. I think the folks in the city who are in charge of the transition themselves are doing a lot of work to make sure it's pretty smooth. But I do think there's going to be a lot of questions come, the first day that all 12 city council members are in City Hall, wondering, first off, where the bathrooms are, but also how do we operate in this new form of government? I think one thing that both the electeds and us as Portlanders need to realize is it's going to take a minute for actual government to start operating. It's going to be, freshman year for all of these people. There's not going to be folks in there who've been doing it for a while, and it will take a minute to learn. And I think folks are going to be impatient. They're going to say, hey, you said within 90 days you're going to make this huge change. And that's not going to be able to happen for a lot of people.
Freshman year, maybe some acne, maybe some awkwardness, a lot of backpacks.
100%.
Lauren, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the statewide lens. We have 3 statewide offices that are up for grabs. There's no incumbents. It's the Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Attorney General. I think it might make sense to start with the AG's race because there's really a sense that this is the race that could be the most competitive. Why is that?
Well, Alex, thank you for making state politics look very straightforward. This is going to be much easier. This seat, it's an open seat. The current Attorney General, Ellen Rosenblum, she's not seeking re-election. And both of the candidates are viable candidates. And that may seem kind of obvious, but it isn't. I mean, there were years where Rosenblum just sort of coasted to victory. There was one year where her Republican opponent was not even an attorney, which apparently you don't have to be to oversee the state's Department of Justice. So this time, both of these people, their resumes align with the job. So that's really helpful. The Democrat, Dan Rayfield, he's the former Speaker of the House. He's a state lawmaker. He's also an attorney. The Republican, Will Lathrop, also a prosecutor. He's affiliated with a human rights campaign. They're both youngish guys in their 40s, white guys. They went to the same law school, Willamette Law School in Salem. And it's competitive, but I think that this is Rayfield's race to lose because, he has the Democratic advantage. He is really clear that he is following Rosenblum's legacy on fighting for reproductive rights, and that is a message that resonates with Oregonians, and Oregon voters support that. But Lathrop, he's hitting the very classic, tough on crime approach. He also has a message that's resonating with people that's like, hey, Democrats have been in office forever. They have not addressed the housing crisis. They haven't really fixed the mental health issues. Why not try a Republican? And driving here, actually, I saw a sign in Northeast Portland that was Will Lathrop and Harris Waltz. So it's also a message that's resonating.
That's interesting. Well, and it's coming on the heels of the Multnomah County District Attorney's race, Lauren, where Nathan Vasquez ran a campaign that was successful kind of in that mold, right?
Right, similar messaging.
Okay, so Lathrop has this background. He's a prosecutor in 2 different Oregon counties, and someone given his age and profile we might hear more from regardless of the outcome here. But the other Republicans running for office are perhaps best known for walking out of the legislature. Why are they the best candidates to emerge for the party?
Yeah, okay, I'll just step back a second here. So the 2 other races, Secretary of State, that is the Republican candidate is Dennis Lithicum, and the Democrat is Tobias Reed. And then the other race is Treasurer, and the Republican candidate is Brian Boquist, and the Democrat is Steiner Hayward. The 2 Republicans in this race, as you said, are best known for participating in the state's longest legislative walkout in the state's history. Voters approved a measure not too long ago saying, hey, if you have 10 unexcused absences, you cannot seek re-election to your seat in the state legislature. So they were willingly sort of giving that up, and that is presumably why they are running now for statewide seats. The 2 candidates that they're running against, they are just you've heard their names. Democrat Tobias Reed, he ran against Governor Kotek for governor. Elizabeth Steiner, she's a state senator forever. She was the co-chair of the powerful budget writing committee, Ways and Means. They have the Democratic machine behind them, the Democratic money, the Democratic establishment. They are probably going to win. It's not a spoiler alert. I would say the one sort of interesting twist recently in this race, if there is one, and it's an important race, but is the DMV messing up the motor voter law and mistakenly adding 1,500 people out of 3 million voters to the voter rolls. And, that is a narrative that bolsters this Republican narrative that there is fraudulent activity with the way that we vote. And that is something that might galvanize a few more people to vote in this race.
Before we turn to some other topics, first off, Lauren, you mentioned 2 youngish white guys. I'm a youngish white guy. I was born in 1983, and in my lifetime, there have been just a handful of Republicans elected to statewide office. There are some senators, U.S. senators, but Vic Atiyeh, of course, was the last Republican governor in the state, and Dennis Richardson won state office as Secretary of State in 2016. Otherwise, it hasn't happened. Why is this the case?
$64 million question, Andrew.
All right.
Republicans have struggled in the state for a long time, but it doesn't mean that they always get clobbered in every race. 2010, John Kitzhaber barely beat Republican Chris Dudley, the former NBA player. A lot of people thought that Christine Drazan was maybe going to give Governor Tina Kotek a pretty tight race. The thing that Republicans have struggled with for a very long time in this state is finding candidates who can coalesce behind, who are moderate enough to appeal to a statewide audience without alienating their conservative base. Remember Newt Buehler? A lot of moderate Republicans liked him, the base not so much. So that's been an issue that's played out in the state for a long time. And a result of that is that Republicans in the state have struggled to build a really deep bench. They don't have a ton of lawmakers who can then get this experience and launch a credible statewide campaign. So it's been a struggle for them.
We should also sort of note, though, that Republicans don't do that badly. Like, they don't get crushed in statewide office. I think even you mentioned earlier a Republican candidate, Michael Cross, who ran for AG several cycles ago, I think. Not an attorney, didn't raise much money, barely ran a campaign, still got 40%. I think if you're a Republican of virtually any stripe and you're the nominee, you're getting 40% in the race. The places they've struggled is closing the next 7, 8, 9%. Chris Dudley lost to John Kitzhaber in 2010. I think he had 47%-ish of the vote. Dennis Richardson, the last Republican to win statewide office, Secretary of State in 2016, had 47% of the vote. They seem to top out around there. It's not a bad place for them to be, but they just really struggle to close those percentages. And one of the things that Newt Buehler mentioned after he had lost to Kate Brown in 2018 is he thinks until Republican politics can get this issue of abortion right for Oregonians, there is just a hump they cannot get over statewide, because this is a state that values access to abortion, and I think the voters have made that clear. And so as long as these are folks that say they won't or don't support abortion, I think they are going to see a challenge. That's going to be an issue in this AG race, I think, because Dan Rayfield is going to be saying, look, I'm going to protect your right to an abortion on the national level. I will take, a President Trump to court if need be. And I think Will Lathrop has really not wanted to go there yet. And so, I don't know, there's a lot of reasons why Republicans have struggled. We could talk about it, but that's my dream.
All this talk of deep bench and Chris Dudley has me thinking about Jabari Walker and Ryan Rupert and the Portland Trailblazers, who start up soon. I know Troy's with me on this one. We got some Blazer fans in the house tonight. All right, Dirk, well, welcome. Dirk, thank you for chiming in. And as you know, Oregonians either love or hate our initiative referendum system. And we've got a big one that you have written a lot about. That's Measure 118. It's united the public labor unions and big businesses. Why is that?
Yeah, Measure 118 is really the main event in terms of statewide ballot measures this year, for a couple of pretty fascinating reasons. So first off, just what it does. It's kind of complex, but essentially it will slap a new tax on corporate sales in the state. Any business that sells more than $25 million of goods in the state, every sale above $25 million is going to get a 3% tax on it. And why it's doing that is pretty fascinating. This isn't actually an experiment in sort of wealth redistribution. What the state would do with this is haul in all this money. We're told that it would be $6.5 billion or so a year. That would be actually just coming from about 2% or less of businesses that do business in the state. But that $6.5 million wouldn't go into the state's coffers. It would be distributed out to every resident of the state. Literally, whether you are a newborn baby, whether you even died in a given calendar year, you could still get this money. And it's not nothing, right? I mean, the best estimates we have are around $1,600 a year for every Oregonian in the state. So if you're a family of 3, you're looking at $4,800 a year. Probably a pretty salient pitch. And what the people that are doing this are saying is, the corporations are taxed too low in the state. Let's do something about that. And then let's help the least among us. We are going to slash poverty. We're going to help children get more stable futures. We're going to boost the economy by giving everyone some money to spend. But like you mentioned, it has galvanized folks, and not in a good way. This thing has almost as many enemies as you can count, and for a variety of different reasons. So People probably won't be surprised that business and corporations are very, very much against this. They say, this is a tax, this is a hidden sales tax. We're going to be forced to raise our prices. You are not going to like that, Oregon, at a time of, where we're still sort of smarting from high inflation. But the really interesting thing is that labor unions are also against this. These are groups that are fairly liberal. They've supported corporate tax hikes in the past. But they are against it because there are some analyses out there that show, even though what the measure is supposed to do is tax all this money, take it for a minute, and give it back to Oregonians, there's a very intricate way it's going to interplay with the tax code, and that's actually going to cut general fund money in the state by $1 billion or more a year. So, labor unions that represent state employees do not like the specter, right, of less money to sort of pay their members. Politicians, for that same reason, they are the ones that spend all this money. They are very much against this. Very vast bipartisan group of elected officials do not like this measure. And then, maybe most tellingly, progressive groups, actually groups that specifically want to raise taxes on corporations and hand it out to the masses in some respect, don't like this because they do not like that this measure would give this $1,600 check to millionaires as much as it would people living under the poverty line. They say that's not smart. It's a very vast opposition campaign.
All right. And Oregonians and the state itself, it loves to pioneer things, right? You would think of all the beach bill, the bottle bill, or just measures that are, even if they're unsuccessful, Measure 110. I mean, is this likely to be the next in a slew of those types of stories, or are observers thinking it might pass? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it's truly a fascinating dynamic, and I don't have a good answer for you. I would just say this. So people might remember in 2016, we had a ballot measure called Measure 97. Very similar measure. It was a corporate tax hike, actually the mechanism that we were going to put into play, very similar taxing mechanism. But that would not have handed out money to Oregonians. It would have let the state, raise $3 billion plus a year and spend that money on services, education, healthcare, things a lot of people value. That failed handily because corporations said, same playbook. This is a hidden sales tax. This is going to raise your prices. Politicians can't be trusted. This time around, though, like I said, $4,800 for a family of three, something that could be very salient and very attractive for people. So I think that is something that the Yes campaign really has going for it. Plus, there's a ballot measure title. The language on the ballot, I think, looks pretty good to people. But you're right, are Oregonians gun shy after Measure 110? Do we want to take a big swing like we did there and get burned like maybe a lot of people feel like we were? It's not helped by the fact that there's a trio of wealthy Californians that helped this thing get on the ballot. Maybe that feels a little experimenty, like we're a petri dish in a way that people don't quite like. I will say this, businesses have raised $13 million to kill this thing at this point. They've spent 10 of it. That suggests to me that they see polling that shows this thing has a real threat of passing.
Okay, stay tuned. Let's stick in the measure world for a moment here, Bryce. We talked a little bit about ranked choice earlier in Portland, but there's obviously the statewide measure as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that Alex was able to describe ranked choice voting so eloquently so that I don't have to. So Measure 117 would ultimately give people across the state of Oregon the option to use ranked choice voting in state and federal elections. They wouldn't have to use it. It's not a requirement. They could still just vote for one person, just as they ordinarily do. And also, it wouldn't apply to state legislative races. This would just be for any other state and federal races except those. The people who wrote the measure say that they did that basically to give it an easier on-ramp so that it would get started more simply. Ranked choice voting is getting a lot of momentum in Oregon. It's already been adopted in Corvallis and Benton County, and obviously in Portland and Multnomah. It's already being used in Corvallis and Benton County, and a lot of people who are from that area, they've been supporting it. And the supporters of this measure really say that this could be a cure for basically polarized politics, especially in state and federal races, which we know are known for becoming very polarizing. You've got the attack ads, you've got the people who try and just energize one, their voter base in one way. But with ranked choice voting, the proponents say they would have to appeal to as broad of a base as possible, and so they would have to, kind of look across the aisle and say, who am I not appealing to? Because they need those second, those third, and those fourth place votes to win. So yeah, basically the winners would theoretically have the broadest support possible, and voters, in the view of supporters, they wouldn't have to choose between the lesser of two evils. And I know we've all had, situations where we've been looking at a state or a federal election and have kind of been like, oh, I don't love these two candidates, but God, if I vote for that third candidate, that's a spoiler for this other candidate who might be better than the other. You see what I mean? So, however, what's been really surprising to me about Measure 117 is actually there's a healthy amount of opposition to it. I kind of thought that this measure was going to be a snoozer, but obviously there's been some, especially from Republicans, who have said that this is an inefficient system. There isn't evidence that it's reducing polarization in the states that have adopted it. That's Maine and Alaska specifically. It's also been adopted in about 50 other places across the country. And basically, a lot of Republicans are saying right now it's so complicated that it presents the risk of errors in the electoral process. And they're kind of, again, kind of harping at that concern around election integrity that's becoming a concern for a lot of Americans right now. But the most surprising pushback that I think I've seen for this measure have been clerks. Clerks are not the people that you think about when you think about public officials who stand up and speak out against something. Their job is solely to be the unbiased keeper of elections, right? But 17 county clerks have endorsed a political action committee that's raising concerns around Measure 117. They come from a wide swath of the state, and they're saying that they're not telling voters to vote one way or the other because they're clerks, but they're saying it costs a lot of money. They're concerned about how it would all run. They're concerned about the transparency of counting the ballots, and that there would be basically a centralized system where they would send all their ballots to rather than counting them themselves. And they also have said, and they raised these concerns in the legislature last year, that they weren't consulted enough on how the measure was constructed. Measure backers, the people who support this, they say that's not true. They did a whole bunch of work with not only clerks, but all sorts of elected officials over the years. And if it passes, the people who support this, they say it would be easy to implement it. They're confident that the legislature would be able to get the ample funding needed to get it going by 2028 is when it would start. So give a pretty easy on-ramp for it. And they basically say, yeah, it might cost a lot of money, but it would be worth it for improving the democratic system. Yeah.
And that's 17 out of 36 counties too, right? So
that is a significant amount of opposition, yeah.
All right, so you talked a little bit about the polarization in politics, and obviously you have been covering this very hot race in the 5th Congressional District, which is, anyone who has a TV or a phone or a computer has probably waded through 42 consecutive campaign ads, on a daily basis to get even to this theater tonight. You had to go past a Lori Chavez DeRemer and Janelle Bynum ad. Just tell us about this race. You've been covering it. What have you noticed on the campaign trail recently?
Yeah, I like that you were talking about the commercials, because actually the Congresswoman just made a joke over, I think I can't remember if this was last weekend or the weekend before that, at a dinner, that she was like apologizing that there's so many commercials out there that she's getting text messages about a lot. It's really funny. Okay, so the two candidates are Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, who's a first-term Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives, and then she is facing State Representative Janelle Bynum. She's been a legislator for a long time here. Both are from Happy Valley. They actually have a long history of facing each other in elections. They have gone head-to-head twice before in Oregon House races. Representative Bynum won both of those races. And what's really interesting to me at this moment, especially, is this race and the dynamics around it are actually mirroring the presidential race in some ways. aside from the major party candidate dropping out and assassination attempts and a hurricane, and am I missing anything? I feel like there's probably a few more. So basically, each candidate is really trying to energize their base, right? That's obvious, that's nothing new. But they're also trying to appeal to that narrow slice of undecided voters who really might tip the scales one way or the other. This race was decided in 2022, the last time around, by 2 percentage points. That's a really thin margin, and it is considered a true toss-up at this point. And polls have been consistently showing that it's basically tied. So each of the candidates are basically trying to come off as and trying to show voters that they are a moderate bipartisan candidate who can work across the aisle, and the person that they are facing is extreme. And I can give a few examples of kind of what that has looked like. Representative Bynum has been talking a lot about her work in the legislature around police reform. Has been talking about, that she worked with Republicans to pass those bipartisan bills at a time when the political tension was really high after the police murder of George Floyd. And she's also kind of trying to tie the Congresswoman who endorsed former President Donald Trump. She's trying to tie Chavez-DeRemer to extreme Republicans and the fall of Roe versus Wade, essentially. Chavez-DeRemer, meanwhile, is really trying to keep this race local. She's trying to show people, hey, I'm here to address the kitchen table issues that matter most to you. This is, housing affordability. This is childcare. This is, she's trying to point to specific examples of what she's done around the congressional district. Getting funding for veterans, getting funding for an airport, and say, hey, I have done this much work for you in these first 2 years, and if you give me another shot, I will be able to do even more. And at the same time, she is trying to show that Representative Bynum was basically another, top state Democrat who kind of stood by as Oregon faced a lot of struggles with Measure 110, with addiction, with the struggles that Portland faced around crime. I'm sure that we've all seen the ads where there's smoldering Portland and, saying Lori Chavez-DeRemer is coming to the rescue, essentially. That's essentially kind of what both of them are trying to do. And the question is, whose argument is going to be the most effective at swaying undecided voters at a time that there's so much money pouring in, and you've got these national political figures now who are chiming in, like the House Speaker, Mike Johnson was here over the summer fundraising for the Congresswoman. We had the leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, was here last week. So it's clear that the temperature is really going up.
Troy, hi.
Yeah, how's it going?
I know you're not here just to talk about Jabari Walker and the Portland Trailblazers deep bench, but I'm sorry for making you wait so long.
All good. I'm batting cleanup, I guess.
So you have reported for years on another race that's dominating the TVs and the airwaves and whatnot. That's also a rematch that's between Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez and Republican Joe Kent. How has she fared in office? What have you heard from folks up in Southwest Washington in terms of her chances?
Yeah, it's a rematch. So I guess, going back a little bit here, these might sound like some familiar faces. You guys we're in the Portland media market, so those TV ads for Southwest Washington are coming across our airwaves too. Joe Kent was a retired or former Green Beret, now turned congressman or congressional candidate. Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in 2022 really ran this shoestring campaign and kind of came out of nowhere to win this seat. You asked how she's been doing in office, and when you're coming out of a very purple district like Southwest Washington is, as a candidate or as a congressperson, she's really tried to thread the needle policy-wise. She's broken from the party very consistently, but also tries to make sure that she's shoring up those votes. I mean, it was interesting to hear Bryce talk about how much those candidates are both trying to shore up the independent vote. It seems like Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, when she's campaigning, she's really going after those independent voters. She's trying to make sure that she's talking about local issues. Kent, on the other hand, comes in very national. He's done I would say more this cycle to try and localize it a little bit, but he still comes in at these debates with headline-driven issues: immigration, clamp down on the southern border, crime is out of control, and Democrats, in his view, are driving up housing costs and inflation.
What about the Congresswoman? What issues is she hitting when you're listening to her talk or when you're talking to her?
Yeah, so she's also trying to make sure that she's addressing these like kitchen table issues too. She's not shying away from when the debates go to these topics of Democrats potentially fueling inflation or according to Joe Kent. She doesn't necessarily try and downplay those facts. She wants to make sure that she comes across as empathetic to voters, that absolutely the costs of housing, the costs of groceries have gone out, are outpacing what a lot of us are making on an annual basis. She is, when it comes to the policies that she's really been working around, though, I mean, she's gotten attacked from the left for some of her votes around, she was voted against Biden's student loan forgiveness program, and that got her quite a bit of backlash. Some folks even found her auto shop and started bombarding it with negative Yelp reviews as a result of that. She's also has not condemned Israel, which, if you're a progressive in Southwest Washington, that's been a very difficult, I think, issue to reconcile your congressperson taking. She's really tried, I would say, to strike this middle of the road approach without, she wants to win independent voters without alienating the left that really brought her into office in the first place.
What else have you heard? I know that you'll have a story coming up soon on this race. I mean, you've been talking to, I believe, Republicans as well about what they make of her. Can you give us a tease of what you've learned?
Yeah, it's interesting because, when I was trying to work on this article, I was calling around a lot of the state level Republicans and asking them, who are you going to vote for in the fall? And it's remarkable how many people, especially the Republican lawmakers, refused to go on the record about it. They didn't want to get involved. Quietly, there's a lot of support amongst Republican lawmakers in Southwest Washington for Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. They really see her as somebody who works across the line, but they can't say that. They won't say that. So it's been, what else we've been hearing is, just like in Oregon's 5th, this is a neck and neck race. They're both polling at about 46%. So if you're, the big question right now in Southwest Washington for these folks is kind of like, how will Donald Trump's presence on the ballot impact this? Gluesenkamp-Perez only eked out her victory last cycle by 2,700 votes. That's less than 1%. And now Trump is on the ballot. Kent is very much modeling his policies after Trump. And that same poll that says that they're neck and neck, Trump is actually 5% up on Vice President Kamala Harris. So it's an interesting question right now whether or not there'll be a coattail effect for Joe Kent. And it's an interesting question whether or not Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez's last 2 years have convinced enough voters to give her more than a 2,700 vote lead.
Former president just a moment ago. I'm also really curious to see in both of these races how the presence of having Vice President Kamala Harris on the ballot, like how that's going to affect the turnout and the energy among a lot of Democrats. Because I remember after the President Biden dropped out, we were talking to a lot of Democrats around the state that day, just like, hey, like what's this going to mean for down the ballot races? And they really think like it could mean a lot. It could really bring out a lot of voters, and turnout generally historically has boded well for Democrats. Yeah.
Whether or not Kamala Harris is driving voters in Southwest Washington is, if you're Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, that's not really a question that you're too concerned with. Really? Like she's absolutely trying to distance herself from national level Democrats. She has not endorsed Harris. Her staff say that she has no plans to tell anybody who she's endorsing or how she's voting this fall. And she is trying, again, to strike that middle ground. Like, she does not want to seem like, she doesn't want to be lumped in so much with the top level Dems.
Yeah, that's interesting because I actually, when I was at a press conference last week and I went up to talk to Leader Jeffrey's staff, I asked them, are you guys planning on going to Vancouver now? Are you planning to go to Southwest Washington? And I don't know if they were eventually going to, but they just kind of said, no, not right now, but we're going to go elsewhere. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. They're heading to Nevada, but yeah, certainly a different dynamic.
I think that would be a no comment from them.
All right, Dirk, let's turn back to you for a moment before we kind of tie things up here. We've talked about a couple political rematches, and you are covering another rematch of sorts here in Oregon that's in the 6th district.
Yeah, absolutely. I will keep it quick. This one's not quite as exciting. So the 6th district is Oregon's newest congressional district. It goes from the southwest suburbs of Portland down to Salem. It's currently held by Andrea Salinas, who in 2022 defeated Republican Mike Erickson for that seat. They are now in the same race, essentially. And what's been really fascinating to me is Mike Erickson is a 4-time congressional candidate, never won. But in every one of those races, he's spent significant amounts of his personal fortune. I think $1 million plus the first 2 times, almost $3 million in 2022 to get pretty close to beating Andrea Salinas within 2.5 points. This year, we have not seen that. He is not on the airwaves where every other major party candidate in a competitive race is on the airwaves. He's been quiet. As far as we can tell, he's only lent his campaign $2,400. He tells me that there's TV coming, that there's a lot coming, and it just hasn't shown up. And so, it's been very hard to understand sort of what his game plan. He said he spent the summer shaking hands at state fairs and meeting voters and passing out business cards, but he's not on TV, which is typically a very, very important piece of the puzzle. And so I don't know. I think this one feels like it's Salinas's to lose given that dynamic. She's raised a lot of money. She's spending money. He is not. We will see. I think most national prognosticators think that CD6 is likely to go Democrat. But, as always, if Donald Trump has an amazing night on November 5th, that is the kind of race where a Republican could benefit.
He told you how many hands he's
how many hands he's shaken, how many,
but it's like
cards,
15,000 or something like
parades.
that. Right?
He's got it all. He's got it all.
All right. Some people keep track of things. Let's go around with a lightning round of just kind of other stuff that you're keeping an eye on. Alex, what else interests you this election cycle?
All right, back. So I mentioned earlier that citywide campaigns are kind of struggling financially because of the city's small donor election program being a bit underfunded. And it's a program that's actually kind of been this boondoggle for a while in City Hall. It's always been housed in other elected officials' offices, which kind of leads to being a bit of a conflict of interest when those folks are actually running for office. Like, are you guys in charge of the money for your campaign? And so there's a measure on the ballot in November to create it's independent election commission for Portland that would oversee programs like the small donor election and oversee their budget and kind of make recommendations on policy. And this is something that has been introduced by the Charter Commission, which is the group that actually introduced all of those reforms I mentioned earlier a couple years ago. And so to me, it's interesting to see if voters will be interested in making another change to Portland's government, or if they're seeing the way that campaigns are running this time around and seeing how limits to the campaign finance system is kind of bungling some of this and do want independence in that program. So that's what I'm watching.
More change. Lauren, what you got?
Okay, Measure 116, it would amend the state constitution and create an independent commission to set salaries for our elected officials, the governor, secretary of state, treasurer, lawmakers. That's interesting because our elected officials are relatively low paid compared to other states. Maybe you guys remember Shemia Fagan. She was a Democratic rising star who was Secretary of State. Everyone thought she was going to be governor. She took a rather lucrative side hustle with a cannabis company that had conflicts of interest with her role as Secretary of State, and that forced her out of office. She resigned, and she really cited her low pay. She was a single mom of 2 kids, and guess how much the Secretary of State makes? Just someone really loud. oh, somebody was really close over there. $77,000 a year. 77. So, she said that wasn't enough. State lawmakers, they make on average $36,000 a year. That's a part-time job, but it's busy. And I talked to a lot of people youngish, again, 40-ish. We're going with that being young in the stage. Who, they said they couldn't do that. They couldn't serve in our state legislature and work another part-time job. And then the result of that is that you end up with a state legislature made up of largely independently wealthy or retired people. And if you want kind of a diverse group of people, you have to think about that. There are some issues with this, though. People question how independent the commission's going to be, like who could sit on it. Always with initiatives, check out the details because that is where it matters, as they say.
It's worth noting, I don't know if I'm on mic, worth noting that in Portland, one reason why I think a lot of people are running for city council is that it's a 6-figure job now, which was a result of our own kind of commission, salary commission that pulled together over the last couple of years. So more lucrative there than state.
Dirk, what are you tracking that we haven't talked about so far tonight?
Yeah, I'm looking at the makeup of the state legislature. This is a cycle where there is virtually no risk that Republicans are going to take over either of the chambers. That's just not the map we're looking at. But what is interesting is whether Democrats will be able to win enough seats in both the House and Senate that they will have a 3/5 majority, a super majority in those chambers. And the reason that is interesting is because it takes 3/5 vote in each chamber to pass a new tax. Democrats really want to pass a billions and billions of dollar transportation package last year to make sure we can fund bridges and roads and all sorts of things. And if they have the votes to do it all on their own, that then becomes a lot easier to pull something together than if they have to find Republican votes. Republicans typically, obviously, are not too big of fans of that. So I think the makeup of the ledge at the end of the election is going to be important.
Yeah, the transportation package, that's the big issue next year. It's going to be a big one. Bryce, quick, what else is on your mind?
I am paying attention to a ballot measure out of Hillsborough that I think could be one of the most divisive out there, and it is about putting fluoride in the drinking water. I love that laugh out there. So basically, that's what it would do. It would put fluoride in the drinking water for residents of the city of Hillsborough. Portland obviously has a long history of this. Portland is one of the largest cities in America. Sorry, it is the largest city in America that does not have fluoridated drinking water. The supporters of this measure say that it could be really helpful for providing, helping prevent cavities, especially for people who can't otherwise afford preventative dental care, while people who are against this say, look, we should be able to decide whether or not we go to the store, buy fluoride, and use it. And also they're concerned about, how exactly the government would control how much fluoride is put into the water and about the potential negative health effects that come with that. There is so much research on both sides of the debate around fluoride that gets people so fired up. I just won't go into it right now.
Please don't.
We don't need to. But I will note that something recently that was very, very interesting happened, and that is that a federal judge in a case with the Food and Water Watch ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to strengthen regulations around fluoride across the entire country. So if it's passed, that could have really major ramifications for exactly how fluoride is controlled. It was a really lengthy case, and it was certainly surprising. So yeah, that's one that I think is really going to fire people up a lot.
Troy?
I'm going to keep it Washington and brief. Washington, unlike Oregon's, currently has a governor's race going on between an exceedingly popular former attorney general against the former sheriff who famously caught the Green River Killer around King County. This is another race where you're seeing a Republican kind of bucking or having to fight against the more extreme fringes of his party against, again, a widely popular Democrat.
Okay, let's leave it there for today. Thank you all for joining me up here on stage, and thank you all in the audience for joining us today. Thank you to the Tomorrow Theater for this great venue. This episode of OPB Politics Now was produced by Anna Griffin with audio engineering from Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org and check out all of our political coverage. As our ballots arrive in the coming days, go to opb.org/election. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.